Welcome to the July meeting. I said this morning, the Safety Committee, June. It's the July meeting of the MTA Board. Do we have any public speakers, Mr. Morello?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We have 4 public speakers signed in this morning. All of today's speakers, I believe, have made previous appearances here, but I would remind them that we would appreciate it if they can keep their comments to our 2-minute limit. That way, we're sure that we can be fair to all. This morning's first speaker is Mr. X. And Mr. X will be followed by Felice Farber.
Is it on? Okay, it's on. Thomas Prendergast. Is it Thomas or is it Thomasina? It's been 3 years since the MTA Police Department deactivated my reduced fare MetroCard and charged me for a crime I didn't commit here, downstairs. No charges were filed. Why? It's been 3 years since you held a public hearing at the Fashion Technology Institute in which the MTA Police Department stopped me from testifying. No charges were filed. Why? Over the years, the same police department mistreated me and company at 347 Madison Avenue. It stopped me from entering the 5th floor boardroom with my possessions. Eventually, they stopped from entering the building itself or with my possessions. No charges were filed. It's been almost 6 years since the same police department assaulted Carlos Sabater at the November 17, 2008 board meeting. No charges were filed. Over the years, the same police department victimized me on Law and Railroad property, also Metro Railroad property. No charges were filed. It's apparent Thomasina doesn't want to share my concerns, so therefore he shouldn't be here, and therefore he should stay home and be a housewife. All he has to do is wear an apron and a dress. He has to wear a dress because he's too big to wear a miniskirt. And by the way, Thomasina, I'm not done with you and your cronies. Just want to inform you, I'm not done with you. I haven't even started yet.
Thank you, Mr. X.
To be continued.
Our next speaker is Felice Farber. She will be followed by Neil Weissman.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. The General Contractors Association, which represents over 250 firms who employ over 20,000 workers, remains extraordinarily concerned over Albany's failure to act to approve your $29 billion 5-year capital program before joining for the year. While our members no doubt have a vested business interest in the infrastructure investments that are included in that program, they are also New Yorkers themselves. They and their families live, work, attend school, and take part in recreational activities throughout the region and depend on the ability and safety of the services provided by the MTA. In the context of historic ridership levels and the importance of the MTA system to the regional and state economies, it is unconscionable that we sit here in late July with a big question mark hanging in mid-air about if and when the program will be approved and funded. We may be able to understand it if there had been some tangible and constructive discussions during the session about the size and scope of the plan, or even a debate about the value of its individual elements, but the radio silence about an issue that affects over 8.5 million riders on a daily basis is astounding and even deafening. Instead, with progress on major capital projects such as East Side Access and 2nd Avenue Subway, and with new subway car and bus purchases threatened by the lack of an approved plan, we are staring down the barrel of additional project delays and cost increases, as well as diminishing service reliability associated with aging rolling stock. The GCA will continue to make our concerns known in Albany, City Hall, and Washington about the impact their collective inaction on this critical transportation issue is having on both the downstate and upstate economies. However, we hope that you, together as a board, and more importantly as individuals who represent important segments of the MTA riding public, will redouble your own efforts to get Albany to act. Your customers and the regional and state economies are counting on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Farber. Next speaker is Neil Weissman, who will be followed by Gene Rushinoff, and we do have one more speaker after that, Alexander Roberts.
Chairman Prendergast, Commissioners. In May, I appeared before you on behalf of New York Cycle Club with letters of support from Ulster, Dutchess, Putnam, and Westchester counties to ask for improved group access on Metro North. We've since had meetings with operations, safety, and customer service, and have arrived at arrangements that both facilitate our wherewithal to organize group rides and satisfy Metro North concerns for rider safety. I thank Executive Vice President Catherine Rinaldi for reaching out to arrange the initial meeting, Deputy Director James McCormick and Chief Transportation Officer Kevin O'Connor for coming up with a deadhead arrangement and getting safety and engineering to sign off, and Thomas Mitchell of Customer Service and Wanda Jones of Group Travel for smooth implementation. Also, prior liaison, Special Events Manager Kyle McCarthy for a decade of good work. We look forward to good relation and increased ridership. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weissman. Gene Rushinoff, to be followed by our final speaker, Alexander Roberts.
Good morning,
Mr.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board. When last we left, Governor Cuomo and the legislative leaders did nothing to deal with the problems of decent service on our transit system, and leaving you with possibly a $14 billion hole in your budget for things like subway cars, buses, track and signals. So what did Albany spend its time on while it wasn't dealing with this incredibly important issue? Amazingly, the answer is dogs, cats, and frogs, who received more attention from the 2015 state legislature than did the MTA. Now, you may not believe me, so I brought along a questionnaire, and I'm going to see how savvy everyone is about the ways of Albany. And an alert, I'm going to give you as much time to answer my, oh, look, all right. I'm going to use longer to answer my questions as you give us to get on to Lexington 4, 5, and 6. So the first question, in the New York State Senate in mid-June declared the wood frog the official state frog of New York. Now, they said their aim was, one, shift the focus from Albany on issues like rent control to issues like the wood frog, follow in the footsteps of the state worm, or rely heavily on lobbying by third graders. Okay? There, you missed the Lex. The answer is lobbying by third graders. I don't make it up, it's true. While both houses of the legislature would let dogs sit at outdoor cafes, it prohibited them from going on restaurant chairs, benches, or seats. And how will this be enforced? You missed that one too. As anyone who owns a dog like I did, the answer is constant prayer. And my last question is, in mid-June, Albany passed legislation designating the service dog as the official dog of New York State, the service cat as the official cat of New York State, or C, the New York State Legislature as the official legislature of the state of New York. Dog. We got serious problems, and we need the governor and the mayor and the legislative leaders to stand up for the riding public, and we'll be watching. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Final speaker is Alexander Roberts. Mr. Roberts.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. You may remember that last year the Westchester Workforce Housing Coalition raised the issue of affordable housing as the MTA, a transportation agency, entered the arena of housing with the first transit-oriented development in Harrison, New York, in Westchester County. We ask that you adopt a policy of including affordable housing in all new developments on MTA land. The proposed new MTA guideline on affordable housing is a very good first step, as it states a policy of New York State, quote, to ease the affordable housing crisis and to end residential segregation. But while we had asked the MTA to lead on this issue and mandate that at least 10 to 20% of its transit-oriented development include affordable units, the agency has instead chosen to follow the local affordable housing requirements where they exist. On the plus side, this should produce workforce units on Long Island under the Long Island Workforce Housing Act and Suffolk County Workforce Needs Assessment. In Westchester, there are 19 wealthy communities named in the Federal Discrimination Consent Decree that have adopted a 10% affordable housing requirement the MTA will honor. In addition, the MTA will honor affordable housing mandates in cities like White Plains. As a public benefit corporation, not necessarily subject to local zoning, your policy will certainly help working families. Still, it is only a first step towards ending the abuse of land use powers in the suburbs that restricts the housing choices of more than 40% of metropolitan New Yorkers who can't afford housing in areas of good schools and economic opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes our public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Morello. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our July board meeting. Before I get started with my remarks, I'd like to acknowledge three people. First of all, our newest board member, Mr. Larry Schwartz, who was nominated by Governor Cuomo and confirmed by the State Senate on June 25th. He's a former secretary to two governors of the state of New York and a deputy county executive of both Suffolk and Westchester County. He brings a wealth of government experience and an intimate knowledge of the MTA and its needs and challenges, and I welcome him to the board to assist us in our difficult tasks ahead. Thank you for joining, Larry. The next two comments I want to make extend to two people who are retiring, longtime personal professional friends of mine, the first of which is Carmen Bianco, who will be retiring from a rather long career in transportation and certainly is part of the MTA family. He retires in August of next month, so this is his last meeting. And he's somebody I've had a very close and intimate relationship with in terms of dealing with the challenges that New York City Transit has faced over the last 20 years. I go back to, I remember the first day that he started in the Office of System Safety when I was Senior Vice President of Operations, and the challenges then were just as daunting, but they were different. When he returned to New York City Transit along with me in 2010, there were two issues that were deeply seated in the organization that were cultural issues. First, we were trying to move from a line management organization where there was an appropriate focus on customer service, but not necessarily an appropriate focus on the need to get critical maintenance done. We had falsification of records being formed by Signal employees. We had credibility damage to the core. And when Carmen and I first met with staff, the staff undeniably said right away, what do you want, safety or productivity? And Carmen unflappingly said, we want and need both. But if a decision needs to be made that it has to be one over the other, it has to be safety. And so through the course of time that he was at New York City Transit, his primary goal was to change the culture of the organization and make sure that the primary focus was safety and reliability in the delivery of service without losing focus on the productivity. He's dealt with some very difficult challenges over the years. He has left the organization in a far better place than when he inherited it, and he will be missed, and I will miss him. I'd like to thank him for the year's service that he provided to the MTA family. The second person I'd like to acknowledge is Fred Smith, who will also be retiring, I believe, at the end of this month. Fred has over 35 years experience in the MTA family, both at Long Island Railroad and New York City Transit. He also was around back in the dark days of the early 80s where we had derailments every 27 days, track fires and problems, and he was instrumental in the replacement of all the track New York City Transit had, half by contract, half by in-house forces. Innovative methods such as the construction of track paneling at Linden Yard, bringing those out and installing them on elevated structure, and doing things that were difficult in terms of changing very, very set-in-mind mindsets. He also met the challenge of all the work that needed to be done after Superstorm Sandy, when the system was deluged with all kinds of problems and the need to be able to restore service as quickly as possible, but rebuild its infrastructure. He will also be sorely missed. Toward the end of our meeting today, one of the last items we're going to have is our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Bob Ferran, will give a presentation on our next financial plan, which is what we do every July. I'll leave most of those details to Bob, but I'd like to highlight a few aspects of that plan. We are on track to cut $1.3 billion from our ongoing expenses this year, and with more cuts planned every year to bring the annual savings to almost $1.8 billion on a base budget of some $14 billion. That's a commitment that was started with Jay Walder back in the dire days of 2009. We've maintained those through Chairman Loda and myself. Besides keeping fare increases to a minimum and investing $129 million a year since 2012, these savings have helped make a sizable funding commitment to our new capital program, which in the mind of some, as Gene Rushinoff has stated, is the prize that we need to achieve now. In other words, before asking the city, Congress, Albany, and anyone else of our stakeholders to fund the program, we've identified ways to contribute funding from our own efficiencies and creative solutions. We cannot ask of others that which we don't ask of ourselves. We will put a total of $415 million into a pay-go account that will generate $8.1 billion for projects in the 2015 through 19 program. And while that's a lot of money, it's still far short of our extensive capital program needs. On the operating side of our budget, the plan reflects our commitment to improve service as we keep responding to the surging demands of increasing ridership, far outpacing the growth that has occurred over the past 20 years. This year we've seen some revenues come in lower than expected, and we've seen increased revenues from subsidies and dedicated taxes, and that'll be part of the presentation that Bob gives. That our cost cutting have allowed us to propose a package of new annual investments to improve service is an understatement. That's the focus that the agency heads have had and will continue to have. We're adding $35 to $40 million a year to mitigate delays, enhance and expand select bus service, and improve communication, to name just a few of the initiatives that Bob will talk about. We're committed to improving service and to meet the unprecedented demand that the system is seeing. When I was Senior Vice President of the Subways back in 1994, before I left the railroad, we carried some 3.5 million people a day on the subway. We now carry almost 6 million people a day in the subway without expanding the size of the network. Ridership on the commuter rails is up as well. It's important for us to be able to demonstrate to people we're doing what we can to squeeze out inefficiencies in the organization and deliver cost savings that we can plow back into a capital program as we make the same ask of our other partners. The minutes of the June meeting have been distributed to all members. May I have a motion to approve them? Second, are there any comments or questions? Mr. Capelli.
Yes, in the bridges and tunnels portion of the minutes, I made some comments at the last meeting about my tenure and about each of the members on the board and the chair. I don't want to retract them, but I would like to table them to a date at some point in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll let the record reflect that. Any other comments on the minutes? If not, may I have a motion to approve? So moved. Committee on Finance. As you know, I chaired the Committee on Finance this month. The action item on page 31 of the board book, which requests approval of the addition of a remarketing agent, was removed from the agenda. The committee plans to revisit that action at a later date. There are 5 procurement actions this month in a total amount of $102 million. There are no non-competitive procurements. There are 5 competitive procurements totaling $102 million, and the committee recommends these procurements, and I move them. I have a motion? Second. Any comment? Mr. Ballin?
Does this include the real estate and advertising, or is that going to be held separately?
Separately. Will be dealt with separately.
Okay.
Any other comments? All those in favor? Aye. There are no ratifications. There is a resolution entitled Statement of Purpose regarding affordable housing. Commissioner Pallady asked me as chairman to bring this proposed statement of purpose to the board. The affordable housing issue was discussed at length a few months ago, and this statement of purpose was debated at this month's Finance Committee, where it was recommended for adoption. The statement of purpose is intended to set forth the board's general position on affordable housing in connection with the MTA real estate transactions involving residential development. It is similar in function to a sense of Congress resolution. It expresses the majority opinion of the board at the time of adoption on a matter of interest. It is not binding on the board, which always has the right to take a different approach when approving a particular transaction in the future. But there is benefit to giving the public and local officials a sense of what the MTA board's thinking is on an issue as important as affordable housing in advance, so that we can minimize unrealistic expectations that complicate the final approval of transactions that we need to make. I know there are some board members who don't think the statement of purpose is necessary, others who think that the revenue production should be our sole objective, and still others who want a specific uniform affordable housing requirement applicable to all of the such transactions. I think it is time for an up or down vote on the proposed statement of purpose. Whatever the outcome of that vote, I am certain there will be transactions in the future where the issue of affordable housing will be discussed. I move Commissioner Palley's statement of purpose. May I have a motion? Moved, seconded. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
There are 16 real estate items that are described on pages 47 through 155 in the board book distributed for this meeting. The committee recommends these real estate items, and I move them.
Second.
Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
That concludes the Finance Committee report.
Tom, I'm recused from the advertising.
Mr. Ballin, you've accused yourselves from the advertising.
As I did on the Finance Committee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So noted. We now have a report from the Transit Committee from Mr. Ferrer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Transit and Bus Committee met on Monday and reports the following. There are 15 procurement actions this month totaling $276.9 million on pages 92 through 124 of the board book. There are 2 non-competitive procurements, one for New York City Transit for $8 million and one for MTA Bus for $1.2 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
There are 9 competitive procurements, 8 for New York City Transit for $251.2 million and 1 for MTA Capital Construction for $800,000. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second? Second. All in favor? Aye.
There are 4 ratifications, 2 for New York City Transit totaling $9.3 million and 2 ratifications for MTA Capital Construction in the amount of $6.4 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second. Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
And that concludes the Transit and Bus Committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrer. The Committee on Metro-North Railroad will be provided by Ms. Metzger.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. The Metro-North Railroad Committee met this month and reports the following. There are 2 procurement items in the total amount of $434,000. There is 1 non-competitive procurement in the amount of $434,000. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
Any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
There is 1 competitive procurement authorizing the RFP process for the solicitation and purchase and public works contract. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
Second? All in, any comments or questions? All in favor? Aye.
There are no ratifications, Mr. Chairman, and this concludes the Metro-North Committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Metzger. The Long Island Railroad Committee report, Mr. Palley.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. The Long Island Railroad Committee met this month, and I report the following. There are 2 action items for board approval. The first action item is to approve the recommended fare policy changes. The next item is to authorize MTA Capital Construction to enter into an agreement with 415 Madison Avenue LLC for reimbursement of design consultant services in connection with utility relocation and foundation reinforcement work at 415 Madison Avenue for the not-to-exceed amount of $400,000. The committee recommends these action items, and I move them.
Second. Any comments or questions? Mr. Albert.
I wasn't able to make the committee meeting, Mitch. Was there a lot of discussion about the elimination of the stopover provision, and do you know how many people actually use that?
It did come up. Pat is here. Maybe Pat knows the number, but the number was significantly small.
That's a capital construction item.
No, he's talking about...
This is the stopover, the change in the fare policy on
right.
the...
Right.
It's used very infrequently. We don't have a number on it, but it's very infrequent.
Yeah. And that's why we did it.
Okay, any further comments and questions? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
There are 3 procurement items in the amount of $5.6 million. There is one non-competitive procurement for $699,000. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
Second. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye. There is one competitive procurement for MTA Capital Construction in the total amount of $2.3 million. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
Second.
Second.
Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye. There is one ratification for MTA Capital Construction in the amount of $2.5 million. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
Second. Comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye. And this concludes the report of the Long Island Railroad Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Pally. The report on bridges and tunnels, Mr. Capelli.
Mr. Chairman, Bridges and Tunnels Committee met this month and report the following. There's one procurement action this month in the total amount of $1.199 million. There are no non-competitive procurements. There's one competitive procurement in the total amount of $1.199 million. The committee members who were present at the committee meeting voted in favor of the procurement, although committee quorum was not present for the vote. Therefore, I move the board approve this procurement item.
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Aye.
Okay, there are no ratifications, and this includes Bridges and Tunnels report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Capelli. We're now going to have a presentation by the Chief Financial Officer, Bob Ferran, to a joint session of the Board and the Finance Committee regarding our financial plan mid-year forecast. Mr. Ferran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have before you Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the July 2015 financial plan. It includes the 2015 mid-year forecast, the 2016 preliminary budget, and then financial plan projections for 2016 through 2019. The presentation this morning is going to follow the same format that we've used before. We're going to review the prior plan, which is the February plan. We will then talk about what has changed since the February plan. We'll lay out highlights of the July plan, talk a bit about service that's being added, service quality adjustments and support, and then talk about our cost-cutting efforts, and end up just with the challenges that we continue to face. So if we look at the first slide, you'll see a review of the February plan. The February plan projected favorable cash balances through 2017 with a deficit of $305 million in 2018. Now, if you're not familiar with the way we are required statutorily to balance our books, we have to do it on a cash basis. Our books are maintained on a GAAP basis, but we balance them on a cash basis by statute. The cash balance that we had projected in 2015 of $47 million would roll forward into 2016, where we're projecting a cash balance at the end of that year of $102 million. We roll that forward into 2017, where obviously by the number you can see we had a significant deficit, and we end up with roughly a break-even of about $10 million. And then in 2018, the projected deficit is $305 million. Now, the February plan was based on three key interrelated elements. The first is a biennial fare and toll increase of 4% in 2015 and then in 2017, effectively a 2% a year increase. The annualized dollar value is about $260 million from the 2015 increase and $300 million a year from the 2017. We also continue to increase our savings targets. As the chairman mentioned earlier, the target this year is $1.3 billion. We expect to exceed that, and it was increasing to $1.6 billion by 2018. The February plan also included about $290 million a year of funds set aside for pay-as-you-go capital. And this was earmarked for the 2015 to 2019 capital program. The February plan also funded safety investments of $430 million over the plan period. Service and service quality investments totaling $173 million over the plan period. Operational and maintenance investments of $146 million, and then information technology investments of $143 million, including the implementation of our enterprise asset management. Now, what has changed since the February plan? Well, there's a number of changes that are favorable toward the budget, and then there's changes that reduce resources available. On the favorable side, we have higher real estate tax receipts. These are primarily receipts coming from the real property transfer tax. That's a tax where we get 1% on the value of certain commercial transactions. It's significantly exceeded the budget that we had, about $260 million for 2015, and over the entire plan period, we're projecting that it'll be about $400 million over what we had in the February plan. Lower pension expenses of about $348 million over the plan period, and that comes about for three reasons. First, most of our employees are covered by NYSERS, the New York City retirement plan. That has had favorable investment results greater than what the actuarially assumed rate of return was, so that's a positive. We also had more favorable labor contract settlements than the plan had assumed, and so that was a benefit. And then finally, we have more employees coming in under the new Tier 6, which has a lower pension requirement than some of the prior pension plans. So all of those things working together reduce our forecasted pension expenses. We're also projecting lower energy cost of about $330 million over the plan period, increased toll revenues coming in of about $212 million, higher petroleum business taxes of about $58 million, and then better than forecast 2014 results of $172 million. And that is from higher real estate revenues received than we thought of about $100 million, greater savings initiatives implemented level than we had first forecast, about $87 million, and the debt service savings of about $15. So that's on the plus side. On the side reducing resources, we've had additional maintenance and operational investments, including continued investment in enterprise asset management, about $166 million, increased investment in information technology, $124 million, and that's really enhancing a comprehensive disaster recovery program, as well as upgrading our PeopleSoft, enterprise resource planning system. We've had higher debt service costs projected now. That has two components. We are projecting lower interest rates during the plan period than what we thought in February, but we're also now looking at the cash flow requirements for our capital construction, and it looks that those expenditures will be more accelerated than what we had planned at the time of the February plan. So in other words, we're having to sell debt sooner than we thought, which increases the debt service. We have loss of local reimbursement from the Long Island bus termination. If you may recall, when we terminated the contract with Nassau County, there were a number of expenditures that we were going to have to pay for. We believe that those were Nassau County's cost. Nassau County did not believe that that be the case. We did litigate. We ended up losing, so we're writing off $48 million of cumulative cost. We will also continue to incur about $8 million a year of ongoing cost for workers' compensation and OPEB-related expenses. We have welfare OPEB current cost payments than we were projecting. That's about $48 million. And we have increased safety and security investments of $40 million. When you take all of the favorable changes in reestimates and the negative changes in reestimates, the net benefit is about $1 billion of additional resources over the plan period. So what are we doing in the July plan? Well, the July plan continues to project fare and toll increases, biennial fare and toll increases of 4% in 2017, and now projects 4% increase in 2019. Again, roughly 2% a year. These are just the projections that we built into the financial plan. All fare and toll increases have to go through public hearings, and they have to be discussed by the board, and the board will make a decision as to what any future fare and toll increases may be. We are increasing the annually recurring savings targets up to nearly $1.8 billion by 2019. That's increasing about $150 million over the February plan. We have additional pay-as-you-go contributions that we're now planning on making of $125 million starting in 2015. Together with a one-shot pay-go contribution of $75 million, that gives us $200 million this year, and over the plan period, a total additional contribution of $700 million. Now, this what we call pay-as-you-go capital could either be used in the traditional sense where the money is just spent every year for direct expenditures for capital. If we do that over the period of time that we think most of our project cash will be dispersed, that would give you about $1.1 billion of additional contributions to the capital program. Or, as we have done in the past, we'll use some of it for direct pay-as-you-go contribution, and then at some point, those monies will be used for debt service in their entirety to support additional bonds. If you do that, it generates $2.4 billion of additional funding for the capital program. That right there would reduce the funding gap by from $14.8 billion down to about $12.4. The plan also includes additional service quality, service support of $183 million over the plan period. Yes.
The end, and then we'll have all the comments and questions, because I know there's going to be a lot of comments and questions on this, unless there's a factual issue you don't understand with the slide. Okay.
Okay. The financial plan now is balanced through 2017. The 2018 deficit is reduced from $305 million down to $175 million, and the 2019 deficit is now projected to be $224 million, what I consider to be a manageable out-year deficit. In terms of the service adjustments, service support, service quality investments, again, $183 million over the plan period. From the midpoint of 2015 to the end of 2019, that averages to about $35 or $40 million a year. The major element of it is delay mitigation programs of $79 million to try to just reduce the weight and problems that our customers experience there on platforms as they continue to have to see the delays. Select bus service, there's additional service being added as well as enhancements to the service. Platform budget adjustments, as you recall, we have guidelines, and then when certain triggers are hit in terms of ridership, we will add service automatically, and so there's about $28 million of that in the program, and some odds and ends adjustments. We continue to increase our annually recurring savings targets. We believe this is very important because, as the chairman said earlier, we feel that we need to make a meaningful contribution to the capital program, and that contribution should be derived from our ability to continue to thereby creating capacity for us to make those contributions, make those investments without turning to the fare box. You can see on this chart what the targets have been beginning with the 2012 November plan. That's the blue line with the diamond on the very bottom. And you can see that in 2012, that was roughly a $700 million a year target. It increased over time, and we were projecting that it would be slightly over $1.2 billion by 2016. Well, in the November 2013 plan, the red line, we increased the targets again, going up to roughly about $1.5 billion in 2017. In November of last year, we increased the targets again, and you can see that by the dotted green line. What we're showing today is, again, additional increases in our targeted savings. We're going, as you can see on the blue line, a little over $1.75 billion of targeted savings in 2019. Now, when we raise these targets, we do not know at that time what the initiatives will be that we will put in place to achieve those targets. So we're constantly having to find additional savings. And that's reflected on the next chart. You can see by year what the initially unidentified savings targets were. That's the height of the bar. And you can see that we've added the additional savings targets in 17, 18, and 19 by the blue shaded colors. But again, the height of the bars reflected the unidentified portion, where we knew we had to come up with target programs or initiatives to achieve savings. The orange solid color reflects those where we've identified the initiative and have either implemented or in the process of implementing, but we have a strong comfort that we're going to be able to achieve those savings. The shaded areas are areas where we're still going to be looking for initiatives. What goes into some of the initiatives? Well, just an the $83 million in 2019. We have almost $20 million of IT savings from our consolidation. We believe that by the time we get the consolidation fully implemented, that we will see significantly greater savings. There's an initiative there for New York City, kind of consolidated timekeeping system on the subway. And we have a number of other small, but in aggregate, significant contributions. There are still large areas that we can go after for cost savings, but what really is reflected here in this $83 million is a number of small efforts at $100,000, $200,000, $400,000 that are generally coming up from the agencies where people are identifying cost savings, and that's what we need to continue to do. And to me, that shows the success of the effort enterprise-wide. So where are we? Well, even with the additional capital and operating budget investments, our out-year deficits are still being reduced. The solid green bar shows the July plan results versus the shaded bars which show the February plan. And as you can see now, we're projecting in 2017 that the cash balance will increase to $165 million. That will roll forward into 2017 to be reduced to $102 million as our costs are greater. And then that in itself is rolled forward into 2018 to help reduce our deficit from $305 million to $175 million, leaving us with a projected deficit in 2019 of $224 million. Now, again, I just want to note that when we see a projected deficit of $224 million in 2019, that is after reflecting two things: a fare and toll increase in 2019 and also $200 million of unidentified savings being realized. So if you were to take out the fare and toll increase of 4% in 2019 and you were to say that we could not achieve the unidentified savings of $200 million, you would be looking at a deficit that would be roughly $500 million greater, so close over $700 million. So those initiatives that we are undertaking are important to bring down out-year deficits. So what are the challenges going forward? Well, first and foremost, it's securing funding for our capital program. We also want to avoid any further legislative erosion of PMT or other revenues that come to us. We need to continue to maintain, to pursue efficiencies, consolidations to maximize our annually recurring cost savings. And what is vitally important is to maintain our focus on those efforts where we've been successful so that we don't backslide. It'd be very easy to put an initiative in place, achieve savings, but if we don't continue to monitor it, we can end up losing those cost savings. We need to address certain chronic or looming cost issues. Over the last 6 years, our liability from claims, workers' compensation, and FELA, which is the railroad equivalent of workers' compensation, has doubled to $2.5 billion. This is an area where we're really looking at it. A lot of the effort will go into incident prevention. Then we want to have improved case management. And finally, we have to and will continue to look for fraud detection and address that. Over time, we have been doing a much better job of budgeting, of identifying and budgeting appropriate overtime levels. I would say that one of our problems in the past is we've underestimated what we really would be incurring, and so therefore it looks like a budget overrun. Right now, I think we have a much better handle on what is reasonable to project for weather-related emergencies. We know what we need to project for scheduled maintenance in those areas, but also there's still definitely room for improvement in overtime. The last is an item that we haven't talked about before, and that has to do with the Affordable Care Act that was passed. It's the Cadillac tax. Basically, under the Affordable Care Act, if we have a health care plan, the value of which in 2018 exceeds the value of a benchmark plan that the federal government will identify, the difference between those two plans will be deemed excess, and we will be subject to a 40% excise tax on that excess. So as we look at it right now, it appears from very preliminary numbers that we will be subject to that tax in 2018, first for the Transit Authority, The number in that year looks to be about $30 million, but our projections now say by 2022 that would be more than $130 million. So this is something that we will have to address with, our represented workers, and it will be part of our, collective bargaining discussions going forward. But I just want to point that out. Finally, we need to continue to maintain discipline that when we receive non-recurring revenues, when we receive one-shots, favorable budget variances, if we don't think it's sustainable, we really want to continue to use it to reduce long-term costs, create ongoing savings by either using it for direct pay-as-you-go capital, put it into our underfunded pension plans to reduce future costs, or put it aside for future health care costs that just keep rising. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the presentation.
Before I open it up for discussion, I'd just like to say a couple of things that go back to some of my opening comments, but highlight some of the comments Bob made in his presentation. As someone who's had the benefit of being a CEO at two of the agencies, the two largest agencies, some of my comments come from that perspective. The others come from my perspective as the Chief Executive Officer of the MTA, and others come as Chairman and an associate of you on the board level. First and foremost, I think to an agency head person, they believe it's essential that we maintain the highest level of quality, safety, and reliability on the services we currently provide. We are in an interested mode to expand those services, but we must do that item first. We have to make sure we have the highest level of safety, reliability, and quality for the services we have already committed to. And you'll see that in the reinvestments that the agencies have recommended, whether they be for service or for safety or for service quality, those reflect that. As someone who is the chairman, I understand the importance of, before we make an ask of our other stakeholder partners for the money we need to be able to fund the capital program, we have to demonstrate a continued focus on taking cost out of the organization, and that's reflected in this presentation as well. There isn't an agency head out there who has not either had direct experience here back in the 80s where the disinvestment in the system resulted in things pretty poorly, or Pat has experienced it in other places and other organizations. They know the importance of the capital program and why funds we can save can be applied toward that to make sure that we get the appropriately sized capital program to not only continue state of good repair investments, but to enhance and expand the system. We are extremely taxed right now by the 8.6 million people a day we carry and the challenges it provides for the system. So I can tell you that there have been ongoing conversations with the Chamber. It's the Secretary to the Governor and the Director of the Division of Budget. And while they were going on through the legislative session, they intensified after the legislative session. And those engaged discussions are leading us to a point that I'm very confident we're going to get funding for an appropriately sized capital program. I've had discussions with the Deputy Mayor of New York. They understand the importance of the capital program. They understand the partnership that we need to have with them. They've asked to have a seat at the table to be involved in those discussions, and we welcome that. And every one of those parties have to do their part. For those of you that remember when we presented the program at $32 billion to the Capital Program Review Board last October, we identified the fact that there were 4 parties that had to come to the table and get us the funding we need, in addition to what funding we brought. That's the federal government, the state, the city, and those who directly and indirectly benefit from the system. And those discussions are ongoing. There is no action item today. This financial plan does not require a vote. It is required from a standpoint of we're revealing in a very transparent way what our finances are and where we're going to go with them and where we're making investment, what those priorities are. And so I'll now open it up to any comments or questions any of the board members may have. Mr. Ferrer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask Bob a couple of questions. And look, first, let me congratulate you on putting together, as prudent as possible, a roadmap considering the unsettled nature of our finances at this point. This looks sensible and trying to address in the best way we can a lot of the needs of the institution, especially in the area of safety and increasing service where that is sustainable. I refer specifically to slide 4 and some of the pay-go scenarios. What is the present proportion of our operating budget that is dedicated to debt service?
Currently, we're about 16% of our operating budget is debt service.
And if these projections or assumptions pan out, what will that proportion be?
Well, we're projecting right now about 19% by 2019. It will be slightly higher depending on what we do here.
When we used to do this in the city, we were always reflexively nervous when we approached the 20% benchmark. That the distance from me today and that experience doesn't make me any less nervous.
I will say that when we put this $125 million a year aside, or recommended putting this aside for the purpose, we did so believing that we would be able to assure that that money could be funded and it would not cause any need to affect the fare box one way or another. Because we did not want to do this if we thought it was really going to increase the burden. We really felt that if we could be comfortable because of the cost savings that we were putting in place, that yes, the number was going up, but that we did not believe it was going to be putting the burden on the fare box. So we're very sensitive to what you've identified, and we do not want to be over-leveraging. But I think this right here is a reasonable, prudent amount.
The only thing I would add, Mr. Chairman, is that I don't dispute anything you say, but virtually one out of every five operating dollars going to interest payments makes us more vulnerable to fluctuations in the economy over which we have absolutely no control. Now, there's no alternative to getting into debt, but we have to come up with more of this contribution. I get it, and I think everybody gets it. But at the same time, we've got to be very, very aware of what position we put ourselves in.
Yes. Mr. Capelli. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a number of thoughts on this. First of all, let me just say, Bob, I have complete confidence in the work that you do and in the presentation that you've laid out. And I applaud you for your conservative approach to things in general. And I particularly applaud the reduction in savings that you've been able to achieve on an annual basis, which I don't think that people understand enough of, and how you have shrunk through your leadership and Tom's leadership, you have shrunk the bureaucracy at throughout our operation, which has allowed us to be able to maintain service levels. And I really think that the MTA needs to make more known about those efforts because that has allowed us to operate in very lean times without impacting on service. With the plan, though, that you have before us today, I'm concerned. The capital budget is way overdue. I was distressed that it has fallen this late in 2015, and we don't have a plan. Perhaps some of the new personnel we have in Albany now can help us move that along. That's just a joke, Larry. In terms of getting this done, but we have 6 million people on a subway system. Anybody who rides the subway knows just how uncomfortable and unreliable a situation that creates. And it's directly related to the capital budget. We cannot do, except on the margins, improve and increase service for the millions of people who use it until we upgrade our systems. Now, there are things in here like the delay mitigation program that will help, but it's on the margins. We need to run more trains, and the only fully funded capital plan throughout the region so that we can safely move more trains in the system and move more passengers. And so, Tom, you've got to stay on top of Albany and get that done as soon as possible tomorrow. It's just has gone on to far too long. And I also applaud the $183 million in additional service that is throughout the plan, but I would suggest that perhaps it's not enough. The delay mitigation is important. Poly and New York City's DOT working with us. The select bus service is great, and it will help in lots of areas that it will run through. But we have a very big footprint in the city of New York and throughout the region that is not going to be getting service. So for those neighborhoods, I am very grateful that we are doing this. But we have a huge footprint, and we have an obligation to people in other parts of the footprint as well to try to eliminate some of the cuts that we did in 2008. Or I guess we started in 2008, that were implemented in 2010, and that areas of the region that have been waiting a long time for service, that have just either never got it or have grown up under our eyes in the last 10, 15 years. There are neighborhoods where they didn't exist before that are begging for service. And you all have heard me speak about the capital plan. My view is the capital plan we were asking for was too little. And I understand that times are lean, but you know, this transit system is what makes the whole region grow. We bent over backwards on the Long Island Railroad contract because of its importance to the region. We bent over backwards on other things because of its importance to the region. The state of New York and the city of New York and the local governments have to go the extra mile in making sure that this system is funded to its optimum because it's so vital to the region. Accordingly, we have in here platform budget service adjustments of $28 million over this 5-year period. That's not enough. It just doesn't. Yeah, that is a couple of $1 million a year. It's $6 million, less than $6 billion a year in terms of increased bus service or increased train service where we currently exist. And keep in mind that if and when we do get a capital plan implemented, and we better get it implemented soon, it's going to take years in order to get a lot of these switches and upgraded for us to be able to do it. In the meantime, we have people who are commuting under very intolerable circumstances. So, we had talked about, we have been for the last couple of years doing service improvements of $30 to $40 million in additional local bus routes, which are vital to these communities that are not served by the subway system, who have never gotten that capital investment. We need to continue with that pattern as part of this plan. And lastly, the idea of having a plan that is dependent upon 4% biannual increases in fares and tolls is a very risky proposition. As Brother Ferrer has said, we're approaching a 20% debt ratio. We're the 5th largest municipal debtor in the country, behind the state of New York, the state of California, the state of New Jersey, and the city of New York. Puts a tremendous pressure on future toll, and since we don't have taxing authority, thankfully, we don't have taxing authority, it puts tremendous pressure on fares and tolls to be going up in perpetuity. The pay-as-you-go is a great idea for us to be reducing our reliance on debt, but when we're using it to leverage debt, it's we're kicking the can down the road for potential severe economic consequences, and we need to be mindful of that. Now, I understand we may not have a whole lot of choice here because we've got to get the bottom line is we've got to get a capital plan done
And so we've got to swallow hard on some of these things in the short term, but you know, until and unless the state and the city come up with another source of funding for us so that we're not dependent upon debt service and a fairer toll system, because the current system we're going to have people coming with pitchforks if we keep increasing their tolls to fund the mass transit system. Something is going to give. So I have moved this board in the past, and we tabled it for a service increase to be able to spread around the region in those areas that are not, we don't have specifics on what, the one criticism I have is that we haven't gotten detail on what those $28 million are going to look like, and I know that the agencies were asked for wish lists. I can't believe that they only came up with $28 million in wish lists.
I'll clarify that. A platform service adjustment is applying the service guidelines with respect to what ridership is occurring on that line at that time.
Okay.
So in a subway line, if there's increased ridership such that we have to reduce the headway and run more trains, we would make that adjustment and the cost associated with it. If there is a reduction in the number of people riding, we would make service adjustments and run less trains. And the way the $28 million was extrapolated was empirically. We have been doing this for decades. We've been doing it since David Gunn was here.
Okay.
And so operations planning looks at the series of puts and takes that occurs, and they're projecting platform service adjustments in the order of magnitude of $28 million to be able to accommodate those. Those aren't new services.
Okay.
And right now, and that was why I made the comment, the agency heads feel very, very, to a person, strong right now that we have to protect those services that we're running right now that we've committed to in terms of quality, safety, and reliability before we take on new challenges.
Okay. I just find it difficult to believe, though, that there aren't several $million in services in each of these companies that the agencies feel that we ought to be running. Perhaps if I've got to do one thing or another, they're looking at this, but it does leave a whole lot of people out of the equation, and that was the purpose of the initial motion that Mitch and I made at the beginning of the budget period, and that I renew. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Albert.
With reference to the statement you just made about platform service adjustments, if it's determined that a line is justified for having additional service, but the signals don't, at this point, accommodate that, what happens? You can't do it.
You can't schedule. We've tried at times on the 6th of scheduling more trains than the signal system will provide, and that's my comment about the supersaturated solution. It's fine as long as there are any delays. If there are delays, you go south pretty fast. Yeah. So, and to a person, just respond a little bit more, Alan, this additional $125 million, these unidentified savings, do not make their night's sleep any easier, because unidentified savings of if you have $100 million, 2/3 of that target comes from New York City Transit. So Carmen puts his head in the pillow at night and says, where am I going to generate $67 million worth of savings in my budget next year? At the end of 3 or 4 years of us taking a lot of money out of these budgets, $1.5 billion right now of recurring savings. So, and what they're saying is you're down to your last dollar. Where you're spending that right now, they say the dollar needs to be spent for the capital program to be able to get that, because that's how critical the capital program is to us. Neil.
Bob, thanks for the presentation. I do applaud, as others have said, the rigor and the thoughtfulness behind it. I also want to highlight on page 4 your first dot point about the projected fare and toll increases. The riders I represent appreciate the predictability of effectively a 2% annual increase. They appreciate, in contrast to what's recently happened in New Jersey at 9%, they appreciate the reasonableness of that. That's within inflation. That is a rate that one can understand how it works. It fits within the property tax cap. That 2% number is a magic number that seems to be understood. The question I always want to raise is someone has to pay. Someone has to pay. Whether for operating expenses or capital expenses, someone has to pay. The rider in New York has some of the highest fare box recovery ratios in the United States, if the planet. So the rider is paying fairly, and the rider continues to be willing to pay, and 2% is a very fair annual way to think about it. But as we think forward, and I do applaud from a professional standpoint the cost-saving efforts you guys are doing, you don't have a lot of your pie chart you can cut from. Your labor costs are fairly fixed, and the majority of what we do is labor. You can't touch the debt. So there's not a lot of choices this group has to find savings. And so what you're doing by finding those savings is appreciated. The riders, I agree, don't probably know how much you're doing on your own, but the other stakeholders do. But someone has to pay along the way. And the rider is appreciative of doing their fair share, and is, but I think we all have to be mindful that there's a lot of room left to still pay for some things, and the rider's already doing their fair share.
Mr. Pally.
I would agree with most of what my friend from the upstate county has said. The people I represent appreciate the predictability of the fare increase. They don't appreciate the inevitability of the fare increase. And I think it's time for us to look again at that situation. And while I understand the importance of the capital plan, someone who was involved in the drafting of the first capital plan in Albany, I deeply appreciate the importance of the capital plan. I do not think we can do that solely at the expense of the operating plan. And I'm concerned that the inevitability of continued fare increases, both in 2017 and 2019, are built into this plan. I understand why they are. That doesn't make me less concerned about the fact that they are there. I think we owe it to the customers we have today who have been using a system, while it is significantly better than it was, I think we all agree is not as good as it could be, and is deeply troubled by the number of people using it. We are a victim of our own success. We've made the system so good that everybody now wants to use it, and when everybody wants to use it, it affects everybody who is using it in that context. And I think we owe it to them, whether they ride the subway or the bus or the commuter rails, to provide them with some benefit from this financial plan from an operating standpoint. And I think the ways to look at that is to look at using some of the capital money that we are setting aside, which I am very concerned about, in addition to the money we've already set aside. I'm not sure. I think we've done our fair share in setting aside the amount of money we have already set aside for the capital plan. I'm not sure we should do more than our fair share. And I think this proposal, to some degree, does that. And we should look at using some of those additional money that has been earmarked for the capital plan for one of two purposes. Number one, obviously, Mr. Capelli and I strongly believe that additional service enhancements are necessary in those places where it is necessary in the next couple of years or now. And secondly, I think we should take a look at our fare and toll policy to determine whether we can, in some capacity, give our riders a break. And maybe that means eliminating or reducing again the 2017 fare increase or the 2019 fare increase in this proposal to ensure that we give something back to them. I understand we're going to give back to them, hopefully, a fully funded capital plan. But giving them back a fully funded capital plan is a long-term endeavor. Even if we got the funding today, most of what we're going to build with it or repair with it is a long time in coming. I think we owe them today for their sacrifices some benefit from these additional funds, which we did not anticipate. And the way I would look at that is to look at the 2017 fare increase to see what can be done and to look at additional service enhancements across the system. I think using some of these funds for that purpose would be very beneficial. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Merdler?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Capelli focused on in part, finding other sources of revenue. Mr. Zuckerman commented that someone has to pay, and others have here mentioned that perhaps we ought to look at fare increases. But no one has mentioned something that I regard as important. The governor has made clear, and he is correct in so doing, that whatever we do, we cannot mess with and provide for increased taxes, and we must avoid hobbling our credit with more and more and more borrowings. So where is the answer? I think the answer lies in thinking outside of the box, of thinking about where we can generate revenues that do not disturb any of those factors, and let me prove my point that it is doable. The City of New York, to its great credit, has embarked upon a program to generate affordable housing. And in the course of that wonderful program, it has come to focus on an issue that has become a nationwide issue, transit-oriented development. And it indeed intends transit districts. Now, you and I know, and indeed everybody involved in any way in the real estate industry knows, that as transit is improved, property values increase. And as they increase, the tax revenues increased without any increase in the tax rate. What is it that I'm trying to derive from those points? Without any tax increase, without in any way impacting on the real estate taxes, as we build a Second Avenue subway and we increase the property values of Second Avenue, those revenues will increase and we should share in them. And that's one way of getting money for the system without any tax increase or the like. We have vast amounts of development rights, air rights, throughout the city. Indeed, the concept has just been tested in the Vanderbilt Avenue SL Green Deal as to how you can maximize values through development and other rights. We need to explore that and do it with respect. I believe we have ignored the potential for tapping resources that exist, that can create money without in any way adversely impacting upon either fares or without in any way adversely impacting on taxes. That, in my view, is our primary charge. Pointing the fingers at Albany or the City of New York is a great way of venting, but it achieves nothing, I think.
Any further comment, Mr. Ballin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I do agree with what Mr. Merdler was just saying, and I look forward to it. I didn't realize this was the time for that discussion, but alternative sources of revenue, particularly from real estate with TIF-like structures, is definitely worth investigating more time and effort into. I have two issues I wanted to raise. One might be a little in the weeds, but I think it's to the advantage of the board and the MTA in its entirety. And I just want to, because we don't have the time to get together for a full financial presentation given the open meetings laws and other issues, this is the time. So I just wanted to make sure to ask Jerry Page and Bob to, at some point in the near future, respond to the following question. With the presentations, which are great, thank you very much, Bob and your crew, are we in full compliance with the continuing disclosure obligations? And I think we should get something formal, particularly given the laws which are shifting and increasing the liability of board members on real estate, on securities.
We will do that.
Okay, and second, I want to make a point with respect to the pay-go numbers. It's very important, and I agree with a large amount of what Mitch said as well, but it's important that we also follow, not only are we prudently examine all projects and all contracts, the way we do month in, month out, to make sure we spend our money wisely and we explore new credits to maximize our ability to maximize our financing. But we have to adhere to the well-settled finance principles, and that is once we carefully and prudently examine projects, that we do maximize our issuance of debt along sound economic and finance principles, and that is items of long-term use should be financed over the use over that long term. And it would be unfair to burden current users with too much upfront payments for facilities and capital projects that are going to be used for an extended period of time. And I think we have to be mindful as we balance all the interests together that we keep the issuance of debt for its proper purpose, as I believe we are doing. But that would necessitate increasing the debt over time so that we're appropriately paying for these facilities over time. And I very much look forward to hearing more about that, and that we use PAYGO in the appropriate way, as you've set forth in private briefings, that there is a balance of some projects where you pay for it now, but also that a large portion of the PAYGO goes into debt service to finance projects which have long, useful lives. And thank you.
Larry.
Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief, and I'll try not to be controversial. Bob, excellent presentation. One of the places, though, I do think, and I know you're focusing on this because you raised it, but I really think it should be kind of near the top of the priority list, is the workers' comp cost. This is a systemic problem across the board. It just doesn't impact the MTA. It's a state problem everywhere. Just a 5% savings would be huge in terms of cost avoidance savings going forward. And I would just encourage that you put all necessary resources behind working with the state, the city, other experts in this area. So I truly believe, whether it's in the case management area, but also clearly in the fraud detection area, there's real savings there. And this is one area where you can make a huge difference and you have control over it. Some other places, like overtime, we don't control the weather. We don't control other situations that occur on a daily or annual basis. But this is an area where the costs have been just growing astronomically. And if we don't get a hold on it now and figure out how to get it under control, it's going to be an ongoing problem. And like I said, it's something I had to personally deal with in a different life, wearing a different hat. And I would encourage that, Mr. Chairman, that put all resources behind it and try to really create a SWAT team type of environment to try to address it and solve it and come up with recommendations sooner rather than later. The only other thing I just want to throw caution to the wind, everybody wants to see services that once upon a time were cut, restored, or address the need to create additional services where there are problems in the system. I just want to make sure, a lot of us have been there before, that when you add a service or you increase a service, that it stays. That it doesn't stay for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and then when the economy turns around and you have to look for cuts, you try to take away the service, or you need to take away the service. It's very difficult to do that, and I think that as you look to increase services, we should keep it in mind that when you put it there, it's there to remain permanently. You may want to tweak it, change it, modify it because of changing circumstances, but I think it would only be fair to the ridership that when you add something, it's permanent and not viewed as temporary. And the last thing I just want to say is on the capital budget, capital plan side, I think all things will fall into place. I know people are impatient. I get that. I understand it. But I think it all will come together. And I've had some conversations with the chairman. I just want to make sure that, and I'm prepared to roll up my sleeves and dig into this, and I've had some experience working not only with operating budgets but with capital budgets, that I just want to make sure that we've thoroughly looked at our capital budget history and our capital planning history, and making sure that not only are we maximizing our design build capabilities under the authority that the MTA has, and look at ways on how we can grow it and expand it. I understand the challenges when we do capital projects, so sometimes you have to shut down service at certain hours to do these projects, but I want to be able to work with you, Mr. Chairman, and your team to see how we can incorporate a lot of those challenges that the MTA has that other entities don't have, to be able to grow and expand, so the burden of the costs are on the contractor and not the ridership or the taxpayers of the state. And look at other things regarding change orders, cost overruns, delays in projects, to see how whether we can improve the performance there, because every dollar of savings that we can dig out of there is going to mean more money plowed back into the capital budget for new capital needs. And I really think that it would be a healthy exercise for us to go in and look at a historical look back at our capital projects and see, what percentage of each project that we budgeted, how much has it gone over, percentage-wise, dollar-wise, see what the delays are, look at why those things happen, and how we can go about addressing those things so that we would actually have more savings and more dollars that can go into the capital budget or to deal with debt service costs versus operating budget costs and meet the needs of the ridership. And I look forward to Tom working with you on that. You and I have worked for a number of years together, and I truly believe that the people of this state, there's no better CEO, chairman that understands this system better than you do. And I have absolute confidence in you and your staff that these issues that I'm raising and other people are raising, that we will find solutions to these issues and make the system better going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Mr. Rottenberg.
First of all, I just want to say, Carmen and Fred, I want to echo what was said before, how much we're going to miss you. Thank you for your leadership and your service, and we wish you well in your next endeavors. You've been great partners to us here in the city. And to compliment Bob on not only, I think, the great job you did on the budget, but as someone who also runs an agency, who has a mayor who's asked us to find ways to economize, I know how difficult that can be, and it takes a lot of work to go in and find ways to save public dollars but continue to maintain service levels and morale and all the things you need to do. So thank you for that. And I think I want to just jump onto something Larry just said, which is talking about rolling up our sleeves in terms of the capital budget. We last night sent out a letter to Tom, and if you all haven't seen it, we'll make sure you get it. I think laying out where the city is, and I think we feel it's crucial that we reach a solution. We are ready to roll up our sleeves and be a partner with the state and other stakeholders. We think all possible options will be on the table. Contrary to popular belief, we are not sitting on some gushing amount of surplus that we can just magically put on the table. There's no big surplus, but we are ready to take a look at all possible solutions, and a lot of them no doubt will require some tough decisions, but we really look forward to that discussion, and we're ready to go. We do feel a sense of urgency about it, for sure.
No further comments. I'll sum and we'll move on. First of all, as I've said many times before, I appreciate the dialogue. We've got engaged board members who represent not only the constituencies they represent, but the point of view they have. Some of you are newer to the table than others. We have a lot of seasoned veterans here, and you're all concerned about MTA fulfilling its mission. So I really appreciate these dialogues because they give us the information we need to make informed decisions. With respect to the lateness of the plan, I certainly share people's concerns, but historically, with the exception of the first financial plan, which wasn't really approved till it was approved, then the clock started, historically, it has been 6 months into the program before we had an approved plan. So we're about a month behind. That doesn't mean that we're going to just wait, because there is a sense of urgency that all parties have. And the sooner we get this resolved, the better. But the last plan, we had an agreed-to plan and an agreed-to and approved 2 years' worth of funding with an understanding we'd come back for 3 years. So we'd like to improve upon that. The issue with debt service is one where we have to have a healthy tension dialogue. If we don't have healthy tension, we're not pushing the organization, we're not pushing the stakeholders far enough. I want to remind people, you know, we're in uncharted waters on a federal level. When I entered my career, I thought the Transportation Trust Fund was going to be the nirvana that would handle this for my entire career, but that's broke. There will have to be a federal solution. We've got somebody that's joined us who's worked more at the federal level, and she may be more pessimistic than we are. We certainly can't wait for the federal government. We're going to have to seize the moment and do what we need to do. But there is a transportation infrastructure problem facing this country that needs to be dealt with, and it will be dealt with. But in the meantime, we've got to move on. And so when I look at $1 trillion asset, $1 trillion asset, and while we need to make sure we don't have too much debt service out there, we have to look at it in the context of $1 trillion asset. And I think John's right. Some of these costs we do need to pass off onto future generations because they will receive the benefit of the improvements that are being made now. And this is a jewel. I've said it before. There isn't a transportation entity in North America that has $1 trillion asset that provides the level of benefit that the MTA does. So we need to focus on that. Larry actually brought up something I was remiss on, and in the dialogue with the state and the director of the Division of Budget, she has been relentless in telling us we cannot afford to have inefficiencies. What are inefficiencies? You know what inefficiencies are when we deliver projects over budget and extended, and we've got a couple of real outliers there that we cannot afford to have in the future. But more importantly, we've got to find ways, as the Transportation Reinvention Commission said, innovative project delivery ways, design, build, different ways where other people bring finance. We transfer risk to other parties who can probably deliver these projects better than we can because every dollar counts. And you have a commitment for us to be able to do that. The dialogue will go on. I will keep you informed. We need to get a capital program as soon as possible. We need to keep awarding contracts. We need to keep moving the ball up the field. And separate and apart from that, there is a laser focus at an operating agency head on the need to deliver safe and reliable service while we're doing that. That is unforgiving, and there isn't an agency head out there that doesn't commit to that. So I think that wraps the conversation for the financial plan for July of 2015. I now would like to go into executive session pursuant to Section 105, Subset 1, Subset E of the New York State Public Officers Law for matters related to collective negotiations. May I have a motion? Second, all in favor, aye. We'll go right into this room here, and we'll come right back out as soon as we're done. Good morning. So we had a very enlightened discussion, as we always do, on the mid-year financial forecast. Any questions? Greg.
What do you want riders to know about the talk? You know, the book is thick. We hear about the capital program deficit. We hear about a possible surplus somewhere. You know, what are you doing to make it better?
First and foremost, every day we're seeing increased ridership, and for those that ride the system, that means challenges for us, and that means challenges for them. You've heard me state in the past that it's more often than not that people have to wait for 2 or 3 trains rather than 1 or 2 trains. So what you're seeing embodied in the financial plan is a commitment to commit resources, dollars, bodies, to be able to address those issues. Predominantly on the subway, but on the 2 commuter rails as well. Because that which we've committed to, we need to do well on a safe, reliable frame. So that's the first point, Greg. The second point is we're still underscoring the importance of the capital program. And we've spent some $115 billion over the last 30 years, but our current ask is an order of magnitude of 32. If you take the bridge and tunnel piece off, it's $29 billion, but we're working toward that number. And we're working toward the other stakeholders in the process committing the resources we need to be able to get that. We need to deliver service on a daily basis. We need to have an ongoing capital program. So the takeaway and the message is that's the focus, that's where we're going, and I'm confident. I've said many times before, one of the strongest reasons I came back to New York, of my 40 years, 25 years was spent here, it's because of the ability of all the stakeholders to come forward and get the finances necessary to run the system and to make the improvements necessary to keep it safe and reliable. And I'm heartened by what progress we've made so far.
Tom, you mentioned in your remarks about the infrastructure crisis that we're all facing nationally. People woke up this morning, there was no New Jersey Transit service, the Amtrak catenary wires were down. You've got your needs on replacing the signal system. How bad is it, and how concerned should people, whatever mode they take every morning, be that it's just going to get worse?
Take a look over the last 5 years, 7 years on a national level. If you look specific to a regional area, there have been crises. There have been bridge failures. There have been loss of infrastructure for short periods of time. There have been acts of God like weather events that affect it. And I think the importance of transportation to a person's life is becoming in laser focus. So it's not just New York. We may have the most pronounced problems because of the size and number of people we carry. But you have them in LA, you have them in Houston, you have them in Chicago, you have them in Philadelphia. And a large part of that solution has to come from a federal solution in terms of funding sources to reinvigorate infrastructure. If you do not have transportation infrastructure, you won't have a successful economy you compete in a global level. That's the message I'm trying to send. Elected officials know that. We need to get aligned, and it's not going to happen tomorrow, so we need to take action today to keep our system in the state it needs to be until we get to that federal solution, or the federal solution being part of the solution.
Just as a quick follow-up, though, is that with the New Jersey Transit stuff, does that have a spillover to you guys when there's a failure there, people flood your system, and how concerned are you by that?
Well, absolutely. The interrelationship between all the transportation elements here. First of all, the three rail elements come together at Penn Station: Amtrak, New Jersey Transit, and Long Island Railroad. So as one service has a problem but affects others, we call it the knock-on effect. But it also chases people to other modes. So people now go to, you know, if they can't find a rail alternative or a bus alternative, they go to a car. So that changes the volume on bridges, for example. So the whole region interacted is affected by a daily failure or problem on one system or a systemic failure over a longer period of time.
Tom, I just want to get your take on the letter that you received from Deputy Mayor Shores, the city saying it's ready to do business to help out the MTA's funding needs. And then is that a drastic turnabout from what your own agency has described as paltry funding from the city over the last 3 decades?
Well, the deputy mayor sent a letter saying he wants to sit at the table. He needs to have a seat at the table, and he will have a seat at the table. There's a $1 trillion asset you've heard me talk about. $800 billion of that asset is in New York City Transit, the subway, the elevated structure, the bus system, the depots. And so the city has to be a major player because that's where a lot of the infrastructure is, that's where a lot of the benefit is. So we welcome him to come to the table, and they're one of the biggest stakeholders, as is the state, as is the federal government.
Tom, some of the board members today were talking about the need to think outside the box. What's doable in that context, and is the region ready for something like the Sam Schwartz toll swap and congestion pricing proposal?
Well, I think where they were looking in terms of outside the box is delivery of a capital program. We may need to get to more innovative project delivery. Historically, we have done design, bid, and then build, and we've done the design, we've done the bidding, we've contracted it out. The railroads do some design build already. They even contract out some of the design, but the Transit Authority has historically been design, bid, build. So one thing is going into an area that is unknown and unfamiliar to us in some ways, because we've done design build. It's not the way we haven't, but transferring some of that risk to a third party. That's one example. Mr. Merdler's comment was trying to maximize the value on real estate we own. Now, when it comes to real estate that we own jointly or shared jointly with the city of New York, because the overwhelming majority of the New York City subway system is covered by the master lease. And it came to us by way of a transfer agreement back in 1950 where we have sole and unfettered use of it. But when we cease to have a need for it, we return it to the city and we share if there's a sale of that property and whatever benefits. On the railroad side, or areas where we own the real estate outright and we can control our own destiny, if we were to embark with a local jurisdiction on transit-oriented development, we don't have to share those revenues. And I believe what Mr. Merdler was saying was maximize the ability to sell real estate assets. If the city's going to see 1 million more people by 2035 and they got to find housing for it and they got to build it somewhere, and there's cramped amount, there's not a lot of unused parcels of land, the west side of Manhattan is being built out right now, why shouldn't we be part of that discussion? That's an example.
I wanted to piggyback a little bit on Jose's question. Given the letter that the deputy mayor sent to you and also the letter that the head of the RPA sent to you earlier this week, is the MTA exploring any new revenue sources that the city might be able to leverage without Albany, and what might those be?
If we go back to what the Transportation Reinvention Committee did, and it was a variety of things, and one of the things they said is they were kind of surprised at what the value of the asset was here, and they want to remind all the stakeholders how valuable it is and need to make investments in it. But then they also talked about the fact that we needed to get beyond state of good repair and go into expand and enhance, because that's where the customer focus was. That aligned with our own surveys that we had done and assessment, needs assessments we had done. And the third thing they did is you need to look at innovative financing means for new revenue streams. And so that's where there are a number of alternatives out there, and I don't want to focus on any one of them. Because if the traditional tried and true sources like Transportation Trust Fund are broken, we can't account on that. We're getting our maximum benefit out of the petroleum business tax or the payroll mobility tax, in addition to taking cost out of the organization that they need to be looked at. And when it comes to revenues that either the city generates or the state generates, you really need to talk to somebody else that has more experience and more knowledge about legislatively what can and can't be done. We are relatively agnostic about the source of funds. We don't want them to come from other fund sources that we're utilizing. But the most important thing is we get funding sources that are sustainable, that we can depend on over a long period of time, and minimize the amount we have to go out through debt finance, although we do think we're going to have to do additional debt finance.
So just to follow up, you've talked about new city funding, you've talked about revenues from transit-oriented development and air rights sales, but that's not going to get you to $14 billion or $13 billion or whatever the new number is. So what other revenue sources are you said you are in earnest talks with the state. What other revenue sources are you looking at?
I'm not going to, those discussions obviously get to those levels. Others are going to focus on what revenue streams. That's part of a process that is part of a legislative process. I'm not going to get into those discussions right now. They do have to be dealt with at some point in time because you need other parties to approve and say, yes, these are the revenue sources that we're going to depend upon. But it would be, in terms of where we're at in the process of the discussion, and if you want to call that a negotiation, I'm not going to go into detail on that.
You've kind of already addressed it, but I was going to ask about the idea of adding an MTA tax to black and livery car service. The TLC said yesterday it would contribute $70 million a year to the MTA.
There are a number of different sources that have been identified in terms of the potential source and what it would generate in terms of revenue. That's one. There's the proposal out for Move New York. There have been others. And like I said in answer to the question from Dana, it's all up on the table being discussed, but I'm not going to focus on any one or group of them.
What would you say to riders about having another fare increase? I know that this has been sort of what's been happening, but what do you say to them about why you all are doing well financially according to these figures, but they're still going to be paying more?
Well, probably for the last, goes back to when Jay Walder was chairman, so chairman ago, it's a number of years ago. As we've been doing these financial plans, we've been projecting what we think the fare increases will be on a biannual basis. Mm-hmm. The first one coming out of the Great Recession was a 10% increase, followed by two 7.5% increases. And then we made a commitment that we would limit the biannual fare increases to the rate of inflation. So that's why we're on the 2% level right now. If we find ourselves in a situation as we approach what we showed in the financial plan today as a 4% increase in 17 and a 4% increase in 19, where we're making sure that we're meeting the safety and reliability levels of the services we've already committed to. We've got a fully funded capital program that we are handling the state of good repair, enhance, and expansion needs of the system, and there's money left over. We'll look at the issue of what the size of that fare increase would be. And that's what I would say. We don't want to just say automatically, infinitely going into the future, it's going to be this amount every 2 years. That's not what we're trying to say. But I do think you heard some comments by some of the board members, is that if we can project from a standpoint of some level of confidence or predictability so people can budget, that's what we're aiming for, with a constant focus that if we can lower the amount of the fare increase, we will do so. Versus what a lot of us has lived most of our entire career in, which is no kind of known point at which we may need to readjust the size of the fare to meet the needs, and then you have these big fare increases. Because if you take a look at the last two fare increases in New Jersey Transit, I believe there was one order of magnitude above 20% in 2010, and there's one about 9% affecting them right now. Those are very hard fare increases for someone to absorb in their budget. And I'm not trying to be critical, I'm saying we're trying to move to a different place. Thank you all very much. Thank you.